Hey man, good to see you. This is Patrick.
Hey, Patrick.
If you ever want to do these in the future, let me know in advance and I can host all the tech for you. Happy to help.
Yeah, maybe I will. It just occurred to me an hour ago to give it a try.
Always happy to help. It's been entertaining watching you get into shit flinging matches on Twitter recently. There's some there's some real troublesome people out there.
Yep, I know. I don't know if Twitter's the best way to do it, but what else can you do?
If Patrick has more experience, as a co-host in spaces like this, you
Yep.
can
Hold
make
on.
him the co-host instead of me.
All right, that's what I'm doing.
Oh, I have to work today. I won't be able to help too much, but
Okay.
if you want to schedule this in the future, I'm
All right.
absolutely happy to assist. I
All
can
right.
live stream it as well.
All right. Well, does anyone here have any questions about IP? I didn't intend to come on and lecture. I just thought I would field questions from people especially people that are confused, or even people that are solid but kind of, have any particular things they weren't quite clear about.
I can give you a prompt that's the most um, frequent objection I've been hearing recently. Maybe that's something to start off with while other people are
All
queuing up
right.
to speak.
All right.
Um, I think it's just the objection of it's a transfer of power from away from small creators to large corporations that can take the innovations of individuals and outrun them with their own inventions with the resources that have already been put together and organized by large corporations. An example of that would be, well, I mean, it could be anything, but it could be like, some new programming technology for computers or some new AI
Right.
innovation. An individual
Right.
wouldn't have the resources or a team put together to take that new invention and run with it. And IP locks it down to where the original inventor can profit from it.
Right. Yeah, I get that, and I understand the suspicion about people that are billionaires wanting to get rid of something that is portrayed as being a protection for the little guy. Um, I mean, however, Dorsey and Musk are like, of all the people out there. I mean, Dorsey, when he was running Twitter, they adopted a policy of not using patents offensively. Like, so they're the ones who disarmed, and I don't think Twitter depended upon patents like a lot of other companies do. And Musk in Tesla years ago said he wasn't going to sue anyone for patent infringement, so he was welcoming competition. So those are the least of the ones that the concern would be there for. But to me, it's just like people don't. I understand people having questions, but they just jump to this. They start making assertions like, um, "Of course, you have a property right in things you create." And then when you challenge them, they don't want to defend it. They don't know how to defend it. They immediately start demanding answers like, well, how would it work in this kind of world? Um, I'm just kind of surprised at how people seem honestly not interested in what kind of law, what kind of law we should have. Like they just jump right to this one nitty gritty issue. Like, well, how am I going to be safe from? How am I going to make it in this kind of world? They don't want to. They don't want to step back and say, well, and like there's this implicit assumption that the purpose of law is to just set up things that seem fair or something like that. Like there's no systematic or careful analytical approach to how we know what laws we should have, which is surprising coming from the people that seem to be libertarian-ish. Like I don't know why you're libertarian in the first place if you didn't have this kind of systematic approach to things. Like, what are people's rights? What are laws? What laws are justified? What should the government be empowered to do? But I got a chat here. Someone's asking. So, from my point of view, I just like to say, listen, if you want to know whether IP laws should be abolished or not, you got to understand what their nature is and what types of laws in general are justified, and then we go from there. So to me, that's my approach, and I guess I'm just surprised that people just don't want to approach it that way. They don't want to approach it systematically at all, and they also have these assumptions, right, that they've heard, and they just build their assertions on that. Like, well, or they'll make you say things that are just wrong. Well, you're in favor of plagiarism. Well, copying is not plagiarism. Or they'll say you're in favor of theft. Copying is not theft. And then they'll say, well, but it makes it harder for me to make money, and you're taking from me the money I would have made. Okay, now we're getting closer to it. So you think that you have some entitlement to make money that you're able to make if the government makes it easier for you to make it by preventing you from having competition. Okay, so now why do you have the right to earn a profit when the government makes it easier for you? Why do you have the right for the government to stop people from competing with you? That's the real question. So that's the way I look at it. And then if you want to drill down to the basic, to the nitty gritty and to the theory, you can do it. But then I'll give links. I'll say, okay, here's an article, here's a post, and they just go on to their next complaint and they don't read the first thing. So there's a lot of people that are clearly bad faith or not equipped to discuss things coherently and honestly, and yeah. So I think that they just they see this with suspicion. Jack Dorsey is an evil tech guy. Elon Musk is an evil tech guy. Why should we transfer our creative effort to them? I think that's how they look at it.
I think it's a feels based. I mean, I think the human species is we feel way more than we think, and it's the outliers that do the thinking. It's the same thing. Like, how in a libertarian society, how will my house be protected from fires? How will my streets be protected from criminals? How will my income based on my ideas be protected from large corporations? And
Correct. And
and
those are questions worth asking. That's true. You can ask a question. That's true.
and if we don't address the feels, we don't get much traction with the human species. I guess that's my observation after attempting this for so many years. The other side of the IP thing that is also rarely mentioned is, yeah, okay, maybe you can't invent something and have government guns protect your invention for you because you thought of it first. But you know what else? It doesn't protect the large corporations anymore either. So when big pharma develops a new life-saving medication that your child needs, you don't have to, blow through your entire life's accumulated assets paying for it anymore. If you can get the formula, you can have it made for, cheaply. And
Yeah.
it goes
Well,
both ways.
well, maybe my assumption is that I'm talking to a bunch of intelligent libertarians. I mean, this is Twitter, so I mean, maybe the audience is. I mean, what percent of these kinds of debates that I happen to get tagged in or brought into, especially when Musk or Dorsey starts it, or Shanahan. I guess it's most. Do you think it's mostly just normies?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and not even the cream of the crop normies. This is Twitter, man. This is this is like a dumpster fire.
I just don't understand what if they just make a series of assertions based upon assumptions that they obviously don't have any basis to think are true because they're wrong. I know they're wrong because I've studied this. So they know they're wrong, but they're so confident about it. Why would they even engage and just make an assertion and then walk away? I guess it's just Twitter. It's just it's sparks flying. They're not really interested in dialogue. Do you think they're not interested in learning?
Absolutely not. Yeah, you'll see in any of my real engagements on Twitter, one of the first things I do when I think the person is worth the time is invite them to have a voice chat with me off of Twitter, because
Right,
Twitter is all about the fight. You want
right,
to say something spicy to get the likes and the views and the engagement, and then move on.
right. And I've done that several times. I keep saying I'll have a Zoom call. I want to record it now for my podcast, and the reason is I don't like to waste my time on one person. Like if I'm going to spend 30 minutes, let other people listen. And in the rare case when I might make progress and someone has an epiphany and they go, "Oh, I see now," then I think that could be instructive to other people. Um, I mean, I had this happen in private conversations. I was just on the Tom Woods cruise in February, and there was a lot of not normies and not newbies, but they're not really, Rothbardian integral capitalist types. And so a lot of them had never heard this stuff. So at dinner table, I'm talking, and someone says, "Oh, he's written a book on IP and he's a patent lawyer," and they kind of assume I'm a libertarian and I have some argument about IP that's good or something. And I'll say, "Oh no, I'm a big critic of it." And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I say, "Do you want to hear it?" And the guy says, "Yeah." So for 15 minutes or maybe just 10 minutes, I gave him a systematic from beginning to end, very compressed, but very systematic argument from beginning to end about property rights, law. And the guy listened and he followed everything I said. By the end, he says, "Oh, you convinced me." And I've had that happen before. And that's nice to see, right? Um, so I'm hoping to get one of these guys to come on and have their eyes opened, and I have a recording of it where people can see it. I guess you see, people can change their mind, people can learn, but they keep turning down my invitation.
Well, no, it's a great filter. I see it like, Socrates. We're walking in the agora. We're offering to have conversations with anyone that disagrees with us.
Right.
And I think that's the right thing to do. But you also need a filter to get rid of the disingenuous people, the people that aren't serious. And a great filter is, hey, join me for a voice chat. And that way other people can benefit from it too. And you'll
Well,
see how many people instantly evaporate. Anyway,
oh,
so
I had this happened a few weeks ago with another guy, and I did the same thing. It was a Twitter thing, and I said, "Let's have a Zoom call." And I said, "We can do it in the next 30 minutes." And then he started saying, "Well, you chickened out." He kept accusing me of chickening out. I kept repeating the invitation. He goes, "Well, I'm not going to talk to you because you're obviously in bad faith." I'm like, "So I'm willing to have a talk with you, and I'm in bad faith." And he goes, "Yeah, you're just doing that as a way to." He said something like, "You're doing it as a way to filter out." It's like, yeah, of course, I am filtering. I'm filtering people that are serious about an actual interchange and a discussion. Yeah.
That's great. All right. Well, it's great to see your face and hear your voice. We'll have to talk again soon. I have to go. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, man. See you.
Maybe a more Twitter level question would be, isn't China an empirical illustration that ignoring a P to some degree is beneficial? A lot.
Yeah, and so the China thing's interesting because first of all, everyone keeps repeating this thing that China is stealing our intellectual property. Okay, so this is the background assumption all the time by every politician, every commentator, Democrat, Republican. They all keep. And the thing is, they're calling China. They're basically insulting China all the time. I mean, there's lots of things to insult China about, but if you keep calling them a thief and dishonest, I mean, it's an insult to their character. And not only that, it's like, wait, don't you think it's a good thing that capitalism, our form of it, the bits of it that China has adopted slowly over the last 40 years, has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of abject poverty. And part of the way they did it was they started using technology and ideas that have been developed over the last couple hundred years, largely in the West, I guess. The Industrial Revolution, Europe, America, and of course you're going to use modern technology and techniques that other people came up with. You're going to use the best thing out there for your robots and your manufacturing and your equipment and your semiconductor techniques. And that's actually a good thing. So I don't know why people think it's a bad thing that they're not stealing it. They're learning. We learn from them. They learn from us. People learn from each other. That's what competition and emulation and innovation and the spread of knowledge and the development of scientific and technical knowledge is about. So I think China's relative success in the last 20, 30 years built upon emulating kind of some version of the free market and capitalism and using ideas from others. They're not stealing anything. They're doing what's good. They're doing what's right. So um, I don't see how. And in fact, I think that's being used as one of the excuses Trump is using for and the politicians supporting Trump's tariffs They don't want to just have reciprocally lower tariffs. They want to stop unfair trade practices, which I guess could include subsidies to their industries, but also could include lack of protection of IP. So they want to use the leverage we have over China and other countries, the leverage of basically trade embargoes or trade, to say we're not going to trade with you unless you adopt Western style patent and copyright law, because otherwise you're stealing it. Yes, it's a common fallacy, and you could explain it, but only if people are willing to listen.
I think Surfer
The
wanted to say
threat.
something. Go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, just sorry, I was just going to say in a recent thread you were talking about how people don't, really believe in intellectual property because it's not immortal. It expires, right? But I actually wonder, because most people, though, normal people believe in inheritance taxes, right? And intellectual property, like say copyrights, are life plus 70 years or 95 years, whatever it is, I forget. And there's no tax that just continues to perpetuate with the company. It'll probably be expended again. So not to be a downer, but I wonder if it's possible that normal people believe in intellectual property even more than in real property.
Well, I think a lot of them do. Even a lot of libertarian theorists do. They'll say things like, "Well, yeah, you have a right to your land, and your house and your car, but things you create with your mind, or even a more pure form of property, you have an even better claim to that because you actually created that." Like they sort of sense that there's a separate argument for ownership. It's like ownership normally comes from being the first one to use a resource or getting it by contract from someone else. Like those are the two ways we come to own things: by occupation of an unowned thing, which is not creation. It's just you're the first one to claim it, or by contract from someone else. Those are the sources of ownership. And there's this idea that there's a third source of ownership, which is creation. But what they don't understand is that they're confusing the source of wealth with the source of property rights. The source of wealth is the availability of scarce resources and raw materials that you own, and that you can then use your intellect and your labor to transform into a more valuable thing. That's what production is in an economic sense. Production means transformation or rearranging. But when you do that, you don't create, and you're creating something, you're creating more value for yourself. In other words, you're making your owned property more useful. But it doesn't mean you have additional property rights. If I take some raw materials that I own, like metal and rubber and plastic, and I turn it into a car, you could say I created the car, but I don't own the car because I created it. I already owned I own the stuff that I rearranged. So I own the car because I already own the things that went into it. People don't seem to understand that. So they think of creation as a separate source of ownership. Um, and partly it's because of this practical issue. They don't understand how you're able to monetize and make a profit off of your intellectual labor if you don't have a legal property right in those creations. They don't understand it, and they don't understand it because they're used to a system where we have that. Just like I'm sure if you go to the UK or Canada and you suggest abolishing private roads, I'm sorry, government roads and the government healthcare system, people will not know. They won't, or the mail, the post office, the postal system. People are used to the government providing all that. They can't even imagine a world where the government doesn't make the roads and have a post office and have government schools and provide health care. They can't. They think it's inevitably part of what the government does and has to do. So they just don't have any imagination. If you tell them, well, we're going to get rid of government healthcare, and you have to take care of your own healthcare. We're going to get rid of government schools, and you have to educate your own children. Either educate them yourself, or don't have them, or put them in private schools. And people don't want to hear that because right now they don't have to worry about that. They're comfortable with the government taking care of things, and they have one thing the government gives them, and that's what they get, and they're okay with it, and they don't want to rock the boat. And similarly, if you're a musician, or if you're a novelist, an author, you're used to having a copyright and having other people have to get your permission to publish it, and so you can demand a royalty. So that's the model that has arisen because the government has given us these copyrights and patents. And that's how the whole society has, engineered the creative industries have they've wrapped around that. And so then the question is, well, if we get rid of it, what will society look like? And the answer sometimes is, well, I'm not sure. But it's like saying, well, we have slavery right now. My plantations in Louisiana, we produce cotton, we make a profit, but it's only because we have slave labor. If you get rid of slavery, how am I going to make a profit? How am I going to have the cotton picked? Who's going to pick the cotton if we get rid of slavery? So it's natural to have that question, but having a question is just not an argument against someone who says we should abolish slavery because it's wrong. If someone says we should abolish slavery because it's wrong, you can disagree. You can say, well, I disagree. Slavery is okay because the Bible says so, or whatever. You could disagree, but it's not a good counter argument to say, well, we shouldn't abolish slavery, even though you just explain why it's wrong, because I'm not sure what a world without slavery would look like. That's just not an argument that we shouldn't abolish slavery. And the same thing is true of IP, as far as I see it. If I can demonstrate the nature of property rights, how they have to come about, their purpose, what types of property rights are justified, and what types of laws we should have to protect property rights. And if you can clearly see that copyright and patent are incompatible with that and violate property rights, to me, that's the end of the story. It's like, okay, that means that copyright and patent laws are not just, and therefore we should abolish them. And it's not a rebuttal to say, but I don't know what the world would look like without these laws. I mean, we can have some guesses. About it, and we have them, but they're not guarantees. And the thing is, people want guarantees. If say, well, you probably will be able to, make money off of if you write a novel, even if people knock it off, you can probably make money selling a sequel with an Indiegogo campaign, or being a consultant on a movie version of it, and you get a cut of their royalties. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities which people don't explore now because they don't need to, because they can use copyright law to bully people. But if you couldn't do that, you have to come up with other ways. But people want to say, well, can you guarantee that I would make as much money? It's like, no, I can't guarantee that. So they want to guarantee because they think they're entitled to a revenue stream or to profit. It's sort of like if you say, well, we need to get welfare is wrong because it steals from people that produce and it transfers the money to the government and to welfare recipients. We should abolish welfare. Or the same thing with government schools. We have public government schools in the U.S. People are used to having the option to send their kids there. 90% of the people send their kids there because they're already paying property taxes. So they might as well get the free schooling out of it. And if you say, well, we're going to get rid of welfare, and they say, well, what's going to happen to the poor? And the answer is, well, they'd have to depend upon charity. Well, can you guarantee that the charitable institutions would be enough money to sustain the poor? They want a guarantee. It's like, well, if you refuse to abolish a program that you admit is unjustified and evil until I give you a guarantee that no one will be affected by it, then we can't make any change at all. Every law is bad because it has effects and consequences. I mean, if a law existed but it didn't have any effect, it wasn't enforced, we wouldn't care. I wouldn't care if drugs were illegal if no one was ever arrested. I wouldn't care if tax evasion was illegal, but the government never did enforce it. The only reason we care about laws is because they have an effect, which means that if you get rid of the bad law, society will change. Getting rid of a law has effects just like a bad law has effects or consequences. So if you get rid of a law that's evil, things will change. The way people make money from being artistic creators will change. The way people make money from being inventors will change. It will change in some good ways, and some ways bad for some people who now benefit from the system. That's the whole point of a system. It benefits some people and it harms other people. And if the law is unjust, you have to get rid of it because of the people that it's harming. And when you get rid of the bad law, the people that are being harmed are better off. The people that have been benefiting from an evil, unjust law are going to be worse off, maybe. But that's why we want to get rid of it, because it's having a bad effect right now by rewarding the wrong people and hurting the wrong people.
All right, Surfer has been waiting a long time patiently with his hands up. Go ahead, Surfer.
Hey guys, thanks for this discussion. Stefan, I've been listening to you for years, probably introduced to your knowledge and wisdom through Tom Woods, who I think is an awesome educator. And it took me a little bit of time to come to the realization that the libertarian anarcho-capitalist perspective is the fairest one out there, at least from what I can tell. One of the things that helped me in my education was learning about Bitcoin. I ended up in a discussion with a guy the other day on Twitter about IP, and my pushback was that, of course, they should be abolished, and there's a little bit of name calling back and forth. And this is a pretty smart guy, investor guy, and he also believes in Bitcoin, at least understands it and recognizes the freedom aspect of a protocol for money that's not controlled by government. And the conversation eventually came around to an you can't own an idea unless you keep it secret. As soon as you share it, now two people possess the idea. And it's only because of the violence and extortion and force of government that one man is not allowed to act on that idea, even though now two people know of it. And he tried to use the argument that as a Bitcoiner, I should recognize my property rights in the private key that represents my Bitcoin or my ability to move Bitcoin within the network. And my retort was that, well, I keep my private key secret because if I let it out, I can't trust the government to enforce somebody else taking my private key, taking my Bitcoin, and then I go take the government and sue that person to get it back from me. Because no matter what proclamation some man with a black robe and a gavel proclaims that you must give back the Bitcoin to this other man who you got his private key, it would have been my fault for allowing that secret out, right? So that an idea or your private key to your Bitcoin only works and stays private property as long as it stays secret. And as soon as you let it out, you lose control over it. And oddly enough, that kind of ended the conversation. He didn't have a comeback, almost capitulating, but not outwardly. He certainly did admit defeat. He called me a dum-dum and left it at that. But I feel
I
like
thought you meant you won, like he agreed with you. So he gave up because he couldn't have a counter to that.
yeah, he just stopped replying. That was just the end. And I feel like I essentially won, but I didn't get a verbal acknowledgement that, maybe I was a bit wrong. I tagged him about this conversation and suggested that he join. I haven't seen him show up yet, but I'm just curious. Is that a fair way to say it? Like from your perspective, an idea once shared is free reign, essentially, unless you have government enforcement on it. And the only way to keep an idea Yours is to keep it secret. And then I would further suggest that if you really want to profit off this, you think you're going to bring some kind of new innovation to society, without IP law, it would be incumbent upon you to keep it as secret as possible, build up whatever manufacturing process you can build up, create whatever supply chain you think you could create in secret, perhaps with private non-disclosure agreements, which are enforceable by potentially a court, but not directly by the government as a blanket thing, right? This is an agreement between two individuals. I'll keep your secret with you, and if I don't, you can sue me. I would suggest that if you have a great idea, as soon as it's out, it's allowed to be copied if we don't have IP laws. But if you get a jump on the competition, you have the ability to profit
Yeah.
better than them, maybe be the leader in the industry. Maybe not. Maybe somebody comes up with a more efficient manufacturing way that you couldn't think of, and they overtake the market and you're out of business. But before government had IP laws, that was the world. You had to make it, or you didn't make it, whatever it was. Is that a fair way? Am I seeing this reasonably
No.
accurately?
Yeah, that's all right. There's a couple technical little nuances I would push back on, but they're not that important. Like for example, um, I think when you have information that only you know, private or confidential information, stuff in your head only, um, I don't think it's accurate to say you own. I don't think you ever own information. Information is just not an ownable thing. Now, it's true you can keep secrets, and to the extent you keep a secret, then no one else has access to it, and you're free to use that information for your own benefit only. Um, although, although people they could discover this eventually anyway. Like they might come up with the ideas on their own. But yeah, I think that the Bitcoin thing is especially a good thing to argue because Bitcoiners they all know that what's the expression? Not your keys, not your coin. Um, you don't see Bitcoiners like your friend going around saying to make Bitcoin really work, the government needs to have a law that gives you super duper property rights protection in your keys, and then we don't have to keep then you don't have to keep a secret anymore because hey, you have a legal right. No one has the right to take my keys, so I don't even need to keep them to guard them anymore. Well, no, of course everyone's going to keep their key secret because you know that the way Bitcoin works, as soon as someone finds your key, they can take your Bitcoins, and it's too late to undo it. It doesn't matter what a court would say later. So the point is, you rely upon the technological security of the system, which is so here's the thing, people don't understand the reason people say you own your Bitcoins, um, is because they're using the word ownership, which is a legal term. It means a property right. But there's a difference between the practical ability to control a thing that's useful to you, a resource. That's called possession. It's just a fact. It's not a legal thing. It's just a fact. Having the ability to possess or use something is what you need to do to survive in the world and to achieve things in the world. But because there's a possibility of conflict in society, people can take these things that you want to use. We have laws that are supports to that. So like the law is a layer on top of, so you have possession, and then the law gives you a legal right to that possession called ownership. So if someone violates your possession right by taking your thing physically, you can go to court and get the government to help you get it back or get damages. So the law of ownership is a normative or a legal thing on top of the fact of possession. But for something like Bitcoin, the fact of possession is all that there is, but that's good enough. So if I have a property right in my house, I have the possession of my house, and the law gives me a property right in the house or in my car. Let's say my car. So that doesn't prevent someone from stealing my car. It just makes it harder for them to steal my car because now they're under the penalty of the law. They're risking going to prison if they take my car. So it makes it even harder for them to take my car or to rob my house. Another thing is I might have a very strong lock on the front of my house, which makes it technically hard for them to break into my house. In that case, the law is not as useful because I don't need the law because they just can't break into my house. So you have this sort of combination of technical means or technological means and legal means, and they're all aimed at making it easier for you to use a resource without other people taking it from you. But if you have something like Bitcoin, it's like you have a door in your house that no one can break into. You don't need the law to say people can't take your key, because they can't take it anyway because of the cryptography. But people use the word ownership. They'll say, well, that means I own my keys, or I own my Bitcoin, because no one can take it from me. So they're confusing possession and ownership. So they're using the word ownership, which is a legal term, but what they really mean is you have possession of your Bitcoin, which is so good that no one can take it from you, right? Um, so that's the confusion there about that part. But as far as trade secrets, I mean, even today, lots of companies rely upon trade secrets instead of patents for their competitive advantage. And even if your secret gets out, as soon as you reveal it to someone, you can't complain that other people start using it. And this is what happens when you make a new product. If you make a new product with a new innovative feature that consumers like, and that it has an advantage over other products, the reason that it's popular with your consumers, your customers, is that it has advantages. But in most cases, those advantages are easy for a competitor to see and to learn from. So by selling the product, you're usually revealing information to the world. You're making the information that you had secret in your head public. You can't help but make it public because it's in the design of the product in most cases. If I sell a new mousetrap, which has some feature that makes it better than the others, I'm going to tell everyone, hey, my mousetrap is better. It has X, Y, and Z feature. So everyone knows what this new feature is, and they go, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to add that to my mousetrap. So for a while, I can probably charge more than my competitors because I have an advantage, because I'm the first one to market. But even after that, I still have an advantage because of my reputation. As an example, um, if you want to buy a pain reliever for a headache, if you go to the drugstore, you can buy a generic acetaminophen pain pill for $2, or you can buy Tylenol for $5. They're the same thing, roughly speaking, same ingredients, because the patent has expired. So Tylenol can't stop people from competing with it, but they still sell for twice the price because of the reputation. So there's always an advantage to being known as an innovator. People trust you. You get your name out there. You get a customer base. You're the first one. You can charge higher prices for a while, and you can charge higher prices for maybe a long time because you have a reputation. So there's lots of advantages to innovating and to being willing to reveal your secrets as the price of selling things to people. Yeah, so I would look at it that way.
So there was another part of the discussion was the idea that IP enhances innovation, whereas my feeling is that when you have a product that's protected by intellectual property rights, you have less incentive to innovate, because as soon as you change it, it may not be covered anymore, and then the additional or the extended argument for not enforcing IP or not having any would be that competition over a long enough period of time should reduce the price of things to the marginal cost of production, so that society as a whole benefits from everyone's innovation, obviously at the potential expense of the first guy to think of it, except to the extent that he can have some market advantage in the beginning, or as you
Right.
illustrated, because of their innovative nature, their the brand recognition, that kind of thing. Maybe somebody will still pay a little more because they think it's maybe a higher quality, but over time, society benefits. Whereas IP inhibits the advantages to society, makes things potentially more expensive, and even keeps some people out of benefiting from innovation because maybe they can't afford it, because the prices aren't being brought down, because competition would naturally be there without these IP laws. Is that a fair perspective?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think
Stefan,
that. So here's
excuse
the
me.
thing.
Before you
Um,
answer that,
yeah,
I'm hearing a little bit of echo. So I don't know. Maybe when you speak, turn the
from
audio
me,
down a little
from
bit.
me, from
But
me.
from both.
Okay, let me turn the audio down a little. I'm gonna go back inside.
I don't know if I'm the only one
Um,
listening to
so here,
echoes.
No, I'm hearing a ton of echo at my end, and it's usually just Spaces is glitchy, guys. I hate to say it. It's one of these things.
I think
okay.
that if you turn
Um,
the audio down while you are speaking, I think that can take care of it.
okay. All right. Thank you. So basically, the argument is that. So here's people don't put it this way because they don't think this coherently about it. Um, a simplistic person would say, without patent law, there would be no innovation because there's no incentive to innovate. Like, it's a simplistic approach. It's clearly wrong because there's been innovation throughout human history. Uh, so their only argument really is that there's a type of market failure when you have an advanced society where you have some types of goods where the value of those goods is primarily dependent upon the way that they're shaped or arranged. In other words, the pattern in them. Um, like, not a commodity like I'm selling, or like shoes, where I make shoes based upon the leather from my animals and I sell them. And I face competition, but it's not so easy for people to compete with me because um, they have to make the shoes themselves. So that's just natural free market competition. But if I'm selling like an iPhone, or if I'm selling a book, where the primary value of, say, the book is not the physical paper, but the way it's arranged, the patterning of it, and where it's really relatively easier for a competitor to make a duplicate of the book by just copying it. Like, they take their own paper and their own ink and they make a copy of that book. Um, so in that case, it's easier for people to compete with me. So it's like they imagine there's this from of where the free market works pretty good. Competition is okay. It's like they begrudgingly permit competition because you can still make a profit in the face of competing with other people, because it's it's slow for people to start competing with you, and it takes a while. There's friction. Sort of like Trump is willing to permit imports if other people let us export to them, which is the other way around. It's the wrong way of thinking about it, right? It's like he grudgingly permits imports as the price of getting the right to export. Just like people grudgingly concede that you can have free market competition. It's okay to subject me to competition because it's not so easy for people to compete with me. But for intellectual goods like inventions or innovative products, or books or artistic works, which are easier to copy, then the competition is too easy. In other words, and therefore it's harder for me to make a profit. Like, I might make a a somewhat of a monopoly profit by being the first guy to make uh, uh, some 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 good in a factory, and I might have a market lead for 10, 15, 20, 30 years on toothpaste or something. But if I sell a book, then it only takes 6 months for people to start knocking off my book or my iPhone. And so it's too easy to compete, so it's harder for me to make this monopoly profit. Not really a monopoly, but it's a higher than average profit. And so in this case, the free market breaks down because it fails. There's market failure is what they ultimately believe in. They think that because of this market failure for certain types of goods, the incentive to innovate and to create and to manufacture and produce is reduced. And so it's harder for me to make a profit, which is enough for me to recoup the costs I would invest in writing the book or in inventing the drug or whatever. And therefore I wouldn't do it. So the market breaks down. So what they really end up saying is that on the free market, there's not going to be no innovation. There's not going to be no books. There's not going to be no music, but it's a suboptimal amount. It's an underproduction. So the market has failed. So the free market can be fixed if we have the government come in and identify these market failures in free market capitalism, and have the government come in benevolently and look around and find ways they can improve the thing by patching it here and there. And one of those patches is the government will grant everyone that makes these type of goods a temporary reprieve from competition so that they can be free of competition for 10 or 20 or 100 years in the case of copyright. And therefore, they can charge these higher prices because they're not afraid of competition. And then they have an incentive to, and so that's the argument, right? And also, the argument rests upon this sort of idea that making a profit is good and it's sort of a natural thing and it's a natural reward for your labor and your effort. And people should be entitled to receive a profit and to make a profit off of their effort. But as you sort of implied in your comments, profit is unnatural, really. It's not a bad thing, but it is unnatural in the sense that um, the only reason you make a profit is because you, as an entrepreneur, look around and you see the market and you see an unfulfilled need that you can serve by coming up with an improved service or product. So you start selling it, and because you're the first, and because you're tapping an untapped need in the market, you're serving an untapped need in the market. Um, you can charge pretty high prices for a while, but then, of course, the way the free market works, other people who also are interested in making money notice this. This is part what the price system does. It sends signals, and one signal is seeing the money trading hands between customers and this new seller. People observe this and they learn from this. They go, oh, here's what you do if you want to make money from people. You have to offer to them this new type of product which they apparently like. So they've learned something by your example. They've learned how to satisfy consumers. So what do? They start emulating what you're doing. That's called competition. So if McDonald's is the first fast food restaurant and it's popular, then Burger King or Wendy's say, "Oh, let's start doing that." Or if Domino's Pizza starts delivering pizza and getting extra business because they deliver it to the customer, unlike Pizza Hut used to, you have to go there. That's a good idea. So people start other type of delivery businesses crop up, like Papa John's and others, and over time, the first guy, it gets harder and harder for him to make a profit, which means that over time, profit goes to zero, which is the natural tendency of the free market, which is a good thing because that benefits consumers because no one's entitled to a profit. And over time, competition makes you lower your prices and come up with more efficient ways and more innovations. And all these things are for the benefit of the consumer and also for the producer in the long run, I would say. But it means they have to work at it and they have to face competition. So ultimately, what IP advocates want is they want to have the government reduce the competition that is faced by people who would otherwise face competition to make it easier for them to make a profit. And when you do that, as now we talk about innovation, um, people argue that without this incentive of the patent system to innovate, you wouldn't have as much innovation. And so their idea is that I could innovate, but I don't because I can't make enough money off of it. But I can if I don't face competition because I can stop people from competing by threatening to sue them with my patent. So I innovate. However, if I have a 17-year monopoly on this product, my incentive to keep innovating goes down. In a free market, if I come up with a new product and I finally start facing competition, I have to keep innovating to keep retaining my customers. That's why things keep getting better. Okay. But if I have a 17-year breathing period where I don't face competition, I don't need to keep innovating. Like my incentive to innovate goes down because of that reason. So there's no doubt that the patent system reduces the incentive to innovate, at least for existing innovators, because they've already got their first patent. They can use that for a while. Or maybe they'll innovate every 5 years or every 7 years instead of trying to do it all the time. So the pace of innovation clearly slows down. Not only that, your competitors' incentive to innovate is reduced because let's suppose I come up with a new phone, a smartphone that has some features, and I start selling it for a healthy profit. That gives a signal for people to compete with me. But the competitor is not going to just duplicate my phone. They're going to take my features and they're going to add their own features. They're going to innovate on top of my innovation. And by the way, the first guy's innovation was also on top of someone else's innovation because no innovation is in a vacuum. Every invention that's ever happened in the history of mankind has been incremental. It's based upon previous knowledge that they got from someone else. That's the nature of innovation, is it's always incremental. But the point is, not only does my patent monopoly that protects me from competition reduce my incentive to innovate, it also reduces the incentive of competitors to innovate, because they can't make the product that's covered by my patent. They're not permitted to. So they would be wasting their time trying to come up with, iPhone number 2, because iPhone number 2 might have some new features in addition to my features, but it would still violate my patent. So they don't bother to even come up with the new iPhone, improved iPhone, knockoff or whatever, because they can't sell it anyway. So it reduces innovation from my competitors as well. So it slows down the overall pace of innovation. And furthermore, it also distorts innovation, because some things you can get patents on and some things you can't get patents on. You can't get a patent on laws of nature and mathematical algorithms and abstract ideas, although the intellectual effort in coming up with E equals MC squared and other things like that are just as valuable and as mentally creative as coming up with a new gizmo or machine or contraption. But patent law protects one and not the other. So you have physicists and mathematicians who are doing research and they come up with things that are basically not patentable. So you could argue that these guys are underproducing their scientific and mathematical ideas too, because they can't get patents on it. So there's another market failure. So I guess we should have the government subsidize them, which they do in the by virtue of the National Institute of Health and National Institute for Humanities, things like that. So so there's no end to the government noticing underproduction of things that they think are not produced enough on the free market, and trying to goose it by artificially granting monopolies to stimulate it, or by subsidizing it by redistributing tax funds. I mean, the whole thing is just a mess. But the point is, in any society, if you didn't have patent laws, you would have a natural balance between, say, the abstract work done by physicists and by scientists, and the amount of effort done in R&D to come up with new machines. You'd have some balance. I don't know, 60-40, 20-30, 90-10. I don't know what it is, but there's some balance. But whatever that balance is, when the government starts rewarding one and not rewarding the other, like when they reward uh, practical innovation that can result in a patent, but they don't reward abstract and basic scientific research, then you distort the balance. You just Milton Friedman has pointed this out. Murray Rothbard pointed this out. It's called a skewing or a distorting effect. Now, why would it be good for the government to artificially interfere and to subsidize and to give patent grants that change the structure of innovative activity and scientific research? Why not leave it alone and let the natural balance happen anyway?
Yeah, listening to all this makes me think how barbaric society still is, like far behind. If anyone else would like to speak, just raise your hand and I sent you an invitation, or you can request.
I just would like to
Yeah, and if
say,
any,
while I'm up
you,
here as a
yeah,
speaker,
go ahead.
thank you very much for verifying my understanding, clarifying a few things, putting this out publicly so that I can share it with other people. Perhaps the gentleman I was debating with the other day will take the time to listen, and maybe he'll be convinced that he has been seeing things incorrectly, and maybe come around and recognize that this is a better way to look at things in society. Whether or not the U.S. government or any other government's going to abolish IP laws anytime soon is, in my opinion, not very likely. There's a lot of people that will argue for it, as we know, as we see out there in industry. But you've made an excellent, very thorough argument and description of the trade-offs and why society as a whole, and
Right.
really people who are not innovators, should really be in favor of abolishing IP laws, because all these big corporations, and somebody said earlier, pharmaceutical manufacturers, they get, this is why natural remedies are not pushed by pharmaceutical companies. They can't make a profit. They can't patent natural remedies. And so they're always
Correct.
looking for the
That's
newest
correct.
version of a chemical tweak that they can get the government to protect them with. Most of it, in my opinion, is poison, but that's a whole nother discussion. But if it was actually good, now most of society does not benefit. A handful gets super rich. A lot of poor people can't even touch some of this stuff. Some of these costs of new drugs and procedures that get patents are super expensive. And that just hurts all of society at the benefit of a handful of people that are protected by government. And I just love the fact that you put this out in public for people to listen to. Hopefully, I see it's getting recorded. So I'm going to share it out for
Yeah.
anybody who needs to understand where some of the unfairness in this world comes from. It comes from magic words on paper written by a small group of people who call themselves government. And they're not necessarily
Yeah.
out helping the rest of us folks. So thank you very much for
Yeah.
hosting this and letting me
You're
come up and speak.
you're welcome. Thanks. And the thing about, so let me make a few points. Uh, the one silver lining perhaps of the patent system is that if you understand that it does distort and impede innovation, and if you are skeptical as I am too of the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, after all, the government is subsidizing it, number one, so the prices are inflated because the government pays for it, and also because the government pushes it through the through the medical licensing and prescription system, and the bastardized insurance system that the government has pushed on us that we have, which makes you don't see the cost of things, and also then the prices are sky high. So the only advantage of the patent system is that it makes the prices of these harmful drugs very much higher. So you have monopoly prices for basically poison being charged. I mean, I'm not saying all. Oh, they're all poison, but yeah, I'm skeptical of a lot of it. So I guess you could say that, well, at least they're so expensive, people don't take them as often as they otherwise would. But it certainly pushes doctors. The whole system is designed to get doctors to push patented drugs, which are hyper expensive, which the taxpayer subsidizes and pays for, and then gives Bernie Sanders an excuse to complain about capitalism having high prices, and the government needs to lower these prices to a lower level, which is still outrageous, and to have the taxpayer pay for it. When the Bernie Sanders, it doesn't occur to him to say, why don't we just get rid of the patent system? Then the prices will fall by 90% anyway. Um, Here's the other thing. People have been sold this myth, and if they're suspicious of big tech and capitalist corporate America, which I understand, but if they're suspicious of them, why don't they also challenge the prevailing idea that the patent system is there to help the little guy? I mean, that's just not true. The One of the reasons we have these large oligopolized industries and very large corporations like, say, Microsoft and the pharmaceutical industry is because they have patents. I mean, Microsoft was built on the combination of copyright and patent. I mean, one of the reasons Bill Gates is so rich is because of patent and copyright law. Patents and copyrights don't help the little guy. They help create monopolies, huge corporations. I'm not a left libertarian, but I can see the critique that in a real free market, you might not have as many giant corporations, and a lot of their giantess is caused because of patent and copyrights. Um, and the other thing to point out is that, so I would say that if you're defending patent and copyright because you think it's the last thing we have to have for the little guy to defend themselves against the big guy, you don't understand that the role these things have played in creating these big guys in the first place. It really benefits the big guys. That's the whole point. I mean, the biggest lobbyists for patents and copyrights are the pharmaceutical industry for pharmaceutical patents, and the FDA system, which also allows them to charge more, and Hollywood, which depends upon copyright, and the music industry, which depends upon copyright. Those three industries are all huge industries that screw over authors, and the publishing industry too. It screws over authors and musicians and independent filmmakers and documentary makers and and home remedies for drugs. This is all tending in the direction of big crony capitalist, or crony capitalist, as Gene Epstein would say. So if you're on the side of the little guy, you should be opposed to these laws. It would level the playing field to get rid of them. Um, and the other thing to point out is that, unlike other critics of intellectual property, which are not principled usually, but they sort of have an instinctive, they're for open source, and they're sort of for copyleft, this kind of stuff. My argument against patent and copyright is not based upon hostility towards uh, the importance of ideas, or or innovation, or innovative freedom. It's because I am a capitalist in the pure sense, and because I believe in the individual and property rights and the free market, and because I believe in innovation and the importance of the mind. These are the reasons why we should oppose patent and copyright. Is because patent and copyright are complete uh, obliterations of all these things. And it's hard to understand that, because the propaganda around it leads people to think that patent and copyright law and IP law goes hand in hand with favoring innovation and artistic creation. Because that's how it's sold. But that's not how it used to be sold. I mean, these things, copyright and patent were statutory monopoly grants. Copyrights came about because the government didn't want people to get books that the government and the church didn't approve, right? Because the printing press started ruining their monopoly over what books you could get. And so the government put a monopoly on that for about 100 or 200 years in England. And when that expired, they gave the right, they came up with a copyright system in the Statute of Anne, which looked like it gave rights to the authors. But of course, the authors could only publish a book by going to the publishing guilds. So they had to assign their copyrights to the guilds. So you only changed the name of the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper was still the guilds, the publishing companies, the church, and the state all work together as gatekeepers of what thought could be transmitted. That's the whole purpose of copyright. And it's lasted that way until about 15 years ago, when finally technology and Amazon and Kindle and all that, and podcasting and doing your own music, finally has started allowing people to be their own uh, publishers and escape the system. And by the way, someone, I think you said earlier, Jim, or someone said that we're not going to get rid of IP anytime soon. I think that's true because of the pervasive misunderstanding of the nature of property rights and the nature of IP laws. However, I think copyright is mostly dead because it's impossible to enforce it on a large scale. You can't stop pirating. You can't stop encryption. So even today, all these people complaining about um, the proposals to abolish copyright, they're living in a world where copyright law is almost a dead letter. Just like the drug war can't be enforced, copyright law can't be enforced. So right now, today, if you're going to make money from selling books or selling your music, you're doing it in a world where you're facing competition already because there's widespread piracy. So you have to come up with business models and ways to make money despite that, like do live performances, or had merch, or have add-on stuff, whatever. This is already the world we're living in. So it's a good thing, in my view, that it's easy to evade copyright law right now. So it's becoming a dead letter. And patents are not the same thing, because it's not as easy to evade patents. But my hope is that someday it will be, if 3D printing ever matures to the point to where there's just easy, 3D printing of uh, of gadgets and machines that are very sophisticated. I mean, imagine 30 years from now just being able to print a computer. um, you won't, or a car, you won't need permission from anyone to do it, and the patent won't be able to stop you. So hopefully, technology will allow us to escape both of these, and at a certain point in time, people will just they'll realize the whole thing was pointless, just like we realize now that COVID lockdowns were a huge mistake, and a mass hysteria. Except that IP hysteria is going to be something that will have lasted for you know hundreds of years. I think I'll take a couple more questions, but I think we should stop at about 10 minutes, unless we're done now. But if anyone has any questions, Feel free to raise your hands.
Hi, Steph. It's Matt. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah.
I mean, not so much a question, but more kind of a prompt, which I think might be a good way for you to kind of sum up this issue for people. Because the way I see it, it kind of breaks down into two areas. There's the principal element, like is IP valid from a property rights point of view, which I think you've demonstrated that it isn't. But then there's also the pragmatic question, which is I think what drives people more. Obviously, they're concerned about, it's like you said earlier, it's a bit like the who will build the roads thing or who will pick the cotton thing. It's who will invent all our inventions thing. And I think people just think that that the incentives are in the wrong place without IP law, which I personally think is a misunderstanding, because I think IP does, it does more to stifle innovation and creation in the way that it hinders people from copying each other and working from each other's ideas and sharing and kind of interferes with that whole process, which I think would lead to more innovations and creation. So I think that's the two kind of elements that people look at this from. There is the kind of property rights argument, which is, is it valid property from a property rights point of view? But then there's the pragmatic thing, which is where I think obviously certainly people that aren't libertarians are obviously, that's where their concerns mainly focused. It's like, well, what's the world going to look like? Who will build the roads? Who will pick the cotton? It's that age-old problem where, because it's a change. But the thing is, I think that one thing they don't appreciate is the fact that the reason why we don't have the market solutions to, the alternatives to these systems right now is because we've got IP law. You know what I mean? So it's not driving the market alternatives, because it's like, if, for example, getting rid of IP law had some kind of negative effect on some level of creation somewhere, like people stop making music or whatever it is, the need for that is going to then drive other ways of rewarding creators and encouraging creators to do that, because we want music. And it's like all the other things that we do. We don't just have to, it doesn't just have to be a simple profit-driven business. We can subsidize things voluntarily that we want in society. It doesn't always have to be about the force of law and coercion and perverting law to try to, right or wrong. And as I say, I think IP fails in that pragmatic point as well of actually, protecting, because we have that problem of creators being not getting the rewards for their contributions anyway, even with IP laws. But I think that's the biggest concern people have, is without IP laws, are we going to be able to foster the creation we want in our society? Sorry, I went on a bit there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's one thing I don't usually like. One thing I usually point is that, okay, most people have a very pragmatic, consequentialist, even utilitarian sort of intuition about this, and they just want a system that will that they're comfortable that they believe will result in lots of good ideas and lots of good art. They want that. Um, and I always point out, well, there's no studies by the economists showing that that you need it, and there's no studies showing that the patent system has generated more innovation. Like, I go through this all the time, and people's eyes glaze over, and they don't want to hear it. And I think the reason is, it's not really that they're really have a sophisticated utilitarian argument. They don't think that they have evidence. No one tries to point to me. Well, Kinsella, you've pointed to 15 or 50 studies that are all inconclusive, and they just don't prove that it's good. But here's one that proves it. No one ever does that. They never say, well, here's a good study that finally proved once and for all that patents make us richer. No one does that, because there are none. But instead, I think really you're right. I think they're just afraid of change. They're ultimately conservative. They're terrified of change, and they're suspicious of people that want to change it. Like, they think I don't know what they think about a patent lawyer who wants to get rid of it, but they must think, Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey are billionaires. They don't trust them, right? They must have something nefarious up their sleeves. So is this hostility towards this conservative preference for the status quo that makes them resistant to change? And then they just come up with scary scenarios like, well, if you get rid of IP, we're not going to have any, but they don't have any evidence for it. So they'll come up with bad arguments like, well, here's my evidence. America and Europe are very rich, and they had a patent system for the last 200 years. Like that's their entire argument, is that the Industrial Revolution happened and America had patent law. So that must be the cause of our wealth, that we had a patent system. That's it. That's the extent of their sophisticated analysis. But really, I think it's just because they just want a comfortable reason to dismiss any attempt to change things.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think, I mean, it's like the problem is we can't show them the alternative world where copyright wasn't
Right.
practiced for the last 200 years to show them how things would have potentially been better without it. And it's a little bit like, but I think a lot of people miss that in a lot of the examples. I see people will point to like some medical research and say, well, do you think they would really do that research if they didn't have the IP and patents to protect them?
Right.
And then I'm like, well, yeah, but if they didn't have that, other people could step in and do the research if they didn't want to do it, you know what I mean? And could learn from it and perhaps improve it in ways that they're not capable of. But because they've got the patent on it, they're the only ones that are allowed to, you know, to work with it and stuff. And then you get into other issues like, you know, like when people talk about, which you touched on earlier, about, you know, like pharmaceutical companies ripping off patients with, you know, ridiculously high drug prices. Well, that's only because they've got the patent and the IP law allowing them the monopoly to, you know, so preventing competition from undercutting them and bringing the price down. There's a reason why aspirin is dirt cheap. You know what I mean? Because there's no patent on it anymore, so anyone can make it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that. So yeah, I think people miss that element of it a lot. I think they think, oh, well, look at that research that was done, and that was done under the paradigm of copyright, so that must be the only way research is going to be done, with under the paradigm of, you know, of these patents and stuff. And it's like, well, no, if you think about it, without those things, that research is more free, because people aren't going to be worrying about infringing on other people's patents and copyright and intellectual stuff. It's just going to be about, you know, creation and innovation, and it will be a bit of a free for all. And if people are worried about how we're going to reward those creators at the root level, because they're not getting their just rewards for their initial contribution and as being like the original person, then we can look at ways to address that. We can look at ways at rewarding that, whether it's someone who was the original writer of a song who doesn't get as much sales on his album or tour as well as someone that covered it later on. You know what I mean? It's like, well, we can still do what we want to do. But, you know, so sorry, I went on a bit there, but I think that's another issue where people get a misconception over where the pragmatic problem lies.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of this inherent conservatism, this distrust of experts and people wanting to change, this paranoia almost, the suspicion, and so this leading to an inherent, and then the fact that we it's a counterfactual. We can't tell them what the world is necessarily going to look like. That's why they look for guarantees. They want, you have to guarantee them that the poor will be taken care of just as good. So so they just say, well, I'm going to stick with the system that I know. In a way, it's so because the state has monopolized and dominated and changed things, they have foreclosed the alternatives we could point to. Because IP is, there's no country that doesn't have IP, because the US and has been so successful in having in Western Europe and getting these IP treaties spread across the whole world, where every country has it. Even North Korea and China have IP law. I mean, it's not like there's a laboratory we can look at to say, oh, here's what it looks like when there's no IP. In a way, it's like a sophisticated or a complicated or say a subtle application of the law of that Hazlitt, or is it Bastiat, talks about, like this, the idea of the seen and the unseen. It's like if you have a government policy that builds a bridge or something, you see the bridge, so people think that's good. But what they don't see is the projects that were not undertaken because people had they were taxed, and they don't have enough extra money left over to engage in things that would have been built. So you're comparing the unseen versus the seen, but the unseen is here and now, and the seen is here and now, and the unseen, we don't know what it would have been. It's like the counterfactual. So it's a little bit like that. We don't know what market mechanisms and what social customs would have emerged in a world that was free. which is why the libertarian inclination is you have to have a little bit of faith in human nature. You have to basically be willing to try liberty. Like the answer is to live a principled life, to favor things that you know are good and just, and to be willing to take a chance on liberty, right? So the answer is I'm not sure what the system would look like, but because I favor justice and property rights, I'm willing to make a change because the current system is evil. And even though I don't know exactly what freedom will look like, I want to try liberty. I want to try freedom. I mean, that's how I look at it. But that problem is that's appealing to an inherent anti-conservative radical idea, a willingness to make changes that will be uncomfortable for some people because it's a new world, even though it seems to be better on paper. I think we probably should stop now because I've gone a little long. Next time I do this, I will try to have a better technological start and maybe get a little help. But I appreciate everyone joining in. And if anyone liked this or wants some more, we can talk about it on Twitter. Thanks, everybody.